Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Transcending Together with Julianne and Lee. Good afternoon, beautiful and amazing human beings. I hope you are all having a wonderful week. I hope you all had an awesome Christmas, end of year, New Year, holiday season, however you choose to celebrate it. So I'm back at work, thank goodness. Don't do well when I don't have something to do, but I gave myself something to do, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Lee, how about you? What you been up to?
Yeah, well, I took time off before Christmas, so I've already been back at work, back in the swing of things. Christmas was quite busy, lots of cooking and people and good food. So yeah, it was quite good all in all.
Too much food?
Too much food, yeah.
Yeah, we as a household don't really celebrate Christmas, so it was kind of just a quiet day. I just worked on my book. I might have mentioned it on
Yay!
the show last week, but I'm now halfway through, 25,000 words in, and it's been an interesting journey, I think. Um, Definitely a kind of therapy, which you would know something about, wouldn't you, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a good therapy technique to write things down. Particularly if you're having like conflict with somebody, it's like write a letter to them with the intention of not necessarily sending that letter to them, but it's the same kind of principle. And I guess what you're going through, and I've been lucky enough to read some of the draft. It's definitely coming through that kind of like almost like a retrospective of your life. Um, so yeah, I'm really proud of you and impressed at your prolific writing skills.
I suppose it was an unreasonable expectation for me to hope to finish it in 2 weeks, um, which
But
was
you've got
the,
halfway through, so that's a start.
yeah. I guess I wanted to try and get as much done before I had to go back to work, because I'm very target. I've got target fixation, so I kind of as soon as
Yeah.
I start something, I've got to see it through to the end. And it had been bubbling away in the background, and I just suddenly the one morning I was like, "This is it. I've got to actually." I had it's I had this like, I finally had the opening paragraph. It just came to me, and I thought, okay, I know where to start now. And so, yeah, that was really good. I think one of the things is it when you write your own story, is it biographical or autobiographical? I never know what the two are.
Autobiographical.
Okay, so it is something of an autobiographical memoir type thing, interspersed with revelations and epiphanies that I might have along the way. So it's not just a historical timeline, if you like. I do try to keep it interesting and try to build in your mind the various worlds that I was in from time to time. One of the things that came up, and I hadn't really given much thought to this until I was writing about. I came over to the UK in 1990, and the story about how that came to be is something for you to buy the book and find out about. It's a very interesting story. But having got over here, and I still hadn't solved, so spoiler warning, I still hadn't figured out what being trans was. And I got to thinking about Section 28. And so that was promulgated in 1988, which was the year I finished school. So by the time I got here in 1990, it was obviously in full swing. And I pondered to what extent the absence of that information, because it would take me many, many more years, again, spoiler warning, to answer the question, why did I feel like I should have been born a girl? And the absence of that information and the way in which Section 28 had driven the LGBT community underground, I think had a profound impact on why I didn't get the answers to that question 23 years ago. Yeah, it had a profound impact, and it got me thinking about exactly when you look at the text of Section 28, it's exactly almost, you could swap out homosexuality with transgender, and that is exactly what this government is trying to do right now. And the way in which that had such a profound impact, I mean, it can't happen. It cannot happen. What are your thoughts, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, I think Section 28 didn't really affect me because I was living in South Africa at the time, and I came to the UK in 2003, which is, I think, when Section 28 was repealed in England, having been repealed in Scotland earlier, I think in 2000. So it didn't really impact or affect me, except living in South Africa at the time in the early 1990s was probably just as bad. And we didn't know about homosexuality as we do now, because it certainly wasn't in the mainstream, and it was very much kind of forbidden and things like that. And yeah, I think the impact of Section 28 was quite profound in many ways. And yeah, I do get your kind of like warning about what's happening to the transgender community in this country now. You can see many parallels with Section 28. Um, Not just in the language, but in the consequences as well.
What's so interesting about it to me is it wasn't a very big piece of legislation. It really only had two parts to it. And it just, it said here, for the benefit of those who don't know the text, it said very simply, a local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality, and a local authority shall not promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Don't know what they mean by that. And then the second part is nothing in subsection 1 shall be taken to prohibit the doing of anything for the purpose of treating or preventing the spread of disease. Very kind of them, really, wasn't it? It came out of the AIDS crisis, the HIV crisis. And in those two sections, 1 and 2, they tied homosexuality to a disease, and in so doing justified them behaving in that way. And yeah, it just really, if we consider the vocabulary of people like the LGB Alliance, and the nutters like KJK and JKR, it really does bring home to one the extent to which they are using exactly the same vocabulary, absent a disease to connect it to. They're finding other ways to make those connections, and that's exactly what they want to do. They want to stop schools from promoting transgender or publish material with the intention of promoting it. They want to ban it in schools. So the interesting thing is local authority, the reason why they separate those two is because, yes, on the one hand, you've got teaching in any maintained school. So the first section, what it implies and the way it affected me so significantly was the libraries are part of the local authority. And because of that, stuff was taken, out of libraries. So even we didn't have Google. So even if I had the vocabulary to even begin my search through a library to find out about this, I wouldn't have found anything. And I just my stand for 2024 is I will not let this happen. And that's my number one primary goal for 2024. And you were also saying, Lee, which I thought was quite interesting, the fact that what happens in one place in the world can have a profound effect on others, because we've talked often about this draping themselves in a cloak of respectability. And that's exactly what things like this help people to do. So in South Africa, they were able to justify their hatred and their discrimination against the LGBT community by saying, well, the great British, look at what they've done. And that gets me thinking about, why it is important that we all cast an eye across the pond to what's happening in America. Because it does give them justification. What are your thoughts on that, Lee?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the quotes that I sort of like came across when I was, looking into Section 28 was the then Tory Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher had said, children who need to be taught to respect traditional morals and values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay. All those children are being cheated of a sound start in life. So that was kind of like the language is still being applied now, where it's like, that being transsexual is not good value for traditional morals and values, and that we can't be teaching that in schools today, that people can have different values in life, and it's almost like it's coming back to that again. And I think particularly what's going on in the States is very much the kind of like right wing, ultra conservative religious factions are coming out and saying this is not moral. Being transsexual is not moral, and I think there's a danger of that permeating through to the UK and being ensconced in our laws going forward. Hopefully not.
Yeah, that moral basis for the anti-transgender thing is something I've also been researching or, or investigating over my break. I've been busy. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll share my thoughts on some of that. See you in a bit. Did you know we've got an absolutely wonderful merch store? You can buy merch from the show. You can buy this mug, which supports my rugby team, the Sussex Dragons. This is one of my favourites. This is best part of waking up, turf tears in my cup. We also have t-shirts which support my rugby team, and t-shirts which express our dissatisfaction with England rugby for the way they've treated trans people. And for you bikers out there, we've got our Sisters on Steel Motorcycle Club. Scan this or follow the links on tigergirl.substack.com. Now back to the show. Welcome back, beautiful and amazing human beings. So before the break, Lee had mentioned the fact that the people who agitate against us insist on using a moral basis for their justification. And one of the things which I was finding out about was one of the sort of YouTube rabbit holes that I went down, was there were a number of discussions that people were having about Jesus versus Paul. People say to themselves, well, what would Jesus do? And a few shows ago, when we were talking about religion and how it constrains the open thought about spirituality, and I had mentioned that many, many years ago, I had come across this book, which was Jesus Says, which was basically the comment in the book, whether it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, or Acts, or whatever, where it was either prefaced or suffixed with Jesus said. And I'd remembered even then reading that and thinking, but that's not Christianity. And I hadn't really given it much thought until I came across this series of YouTube videos. And it really struck me that the vast majority of the New Testament was not what Jesus said, it was what Paul said. And I hadn't ever really thought about it that way. But the majority of the New Testament is Paul's letters to the Romans, the Corinthians, and so forth, and were written many years, obviously, after, maybe even hundreds of years after the writing of the Gospels. And it was Paul who was misogynistic and racist, and who continued to support slavery and the definition of a woman as the property of her father, until she married, whereafter she became the property of her husband. And even should her husband pass away, she was then required to become the property of a brother or uncle or some other member of his family. So according to Paul, women were not allowed their own agency in the world. And that really struck me, because I guess it's something you always know, but it's you only have that aha moment when someone else says it to you. So yeah, that to me was really quite interesting. I mean, what do you think, Lee?
Yeah, I've just had that aha moment now myself, you know. Yeah, very, very interesting, especially because that's the kind of philosophy, religion that the very far right Christian community is trying to ensconce upon us, that women are nothing more than just possession. And yeah, as a woman myself, you know, that's not something that I would subscribe to. You know, I think we were all created equal, and yeah, just looking back on that, it's quite interesting that that was the thinking and the narrative back in those days, and it took centuries for that to change, didn't it?
Yeah, it was a big fight, wasn't it? Things like the suffragette movement and things like that. Of course, people forget that the suffragettes won the right of women to vote, but only white women.
Mm.
So that was still another battle that had to be fought. And a good friend of mine said to me, what you need to realize is that women had to fight tooth and nail to gain agency in Western society. And she challenged me on the idea that she said, are you not perhaps being a bit misogynistic that you assume trans women are not going to have to fight for their rights? And it really made me think, because I think that also has a lot to do with the issues people have between trans women's rights and cis women's rights. And it is an interesting thought experiment, really, because why would trans women assume that we would automatically be conferred with these rights? And I think it's more a testament to the fact that women's rights are still not actually embedded as a baseline in Western society. That for a lot of women, or some women, I don't know if it's a lot, but for some women, like J.K. Rowling and KJK, they see the pie, or the cake, if you like, of rights as something that doesn't get bigger. It just gets divided. And by putting more people into that bucket, in their mind, they see it as a disenfranchisement of the rights that they fought so hard to achieve. So I can always get inside their head and understand what they are, where they are coming from. It's not justified, because the cake isn't defined. It can get bigger, but it does explain possibly their thought process, getting inside the mind of people like that. What do you think?
Well, I actually came across a meme that sums that up brilliantly, and it was basically it went something along the lines of: women and girls have lost the right to female-only spaces, sports, and even our own words to describe ourselves. To ask for those back has nothing to do with hate, and I think that just summarizes the mindset of those detractors that are against, you know, the trans women in particular. Is that's the mindset. And yeah, it's hard to have a conversation with somebody if that's, you know, their blinkered mindset, that they're not willing to look past that, because their message is that women after being suppressed for so many years and then finally having gained their freedom, are now under attack again. They can't even call themselves women now because men can be women kind of mentality. And yeah, I think that is the narrative that is being propagated through mainstream media and things like that. We've often spoken on the show about not listening to the misinformation and disinformation out there, but rather doing your own research. And I just think to myself, like a year ago, I mean, I've known you for quite some time, but a year ago, having a conversation with somebody like you about these issues that I might not have been aware of myself, and so I've come about, and I think my mindset has changed a lot just in the conversations that we've been having, particularly on the show. And it's a hard struggle when there are so few that have that mindset that is different from the mainstream narrative. It's really difficult. It's like an uphill battle, really. When this is what I've just read from that meme is what is being put out there as a defense mechanism. And then I think also what's quite interesting is that you linked Section 28 to AIDS. And I think I get the feeling that there's this underlying narrative that says that trans people are mentally diseased. It's a disease. You people are nuts. Certifiable. Um,
Yeah, there's
so
something wrong
yeah,
with it. It's a
yeah,
mental
it's
disease.
it's a
Yeah.
it's a mental disease. There's something wrong with you.
Yeah, I guess that is what they're trying to connect to. And it's so interesting, yeah, because I think it was probably in one of our earliest first or second shows. We had a conversation about this and how you had left things, at the end of that discussion where you had said to everybody, if you don't know a trans person, go out and meet one.
Yeah,
Go and find
exactly.
out for
Yeah,
yourself. It's only ever through dialogue that
yeah,
these things can ever be resolved. And I think that's where, to a certain extent, I'm prepared to extend that olive branch to people who think that the size of the pie is defined and it's only how you divide it up that matters, and that actually rights can expand. And it's also, HIV, people were afraid of it. It was easy to trigger that fear, wasn't it? That gay men are going to spread it, and then closeted gay men are going to sleep with other
take it
gay
back to
men
their
and then
wives. Yeah,
and bring it back to their wives and all the rest of it. So they used that as a way to engender fear in the population. And that's exactly what, I guess, yes, that is the analogy, the parallel is that they're using the safety of women and the fear that women have in being in society because their rights are not as solidified as they ought to be. So they're playing on that fear. They're using that fear as a way to get people to agree with them. So they use the fear that trans women are going to replace women in sport, and trans women are going to use being trans to gain access to changing rooms and bathrooms and sexually abuse women by pretending to be women, even when the statistics don't bear it out. It doesn't matter. Fear baiting is never supported statistically. Fear baiting was what Hitler used to justify the extermination of the Jews. Fear baiting is what the Israelis are doing to justify them treating the Palestinians the way they are. Fear baiting has always been used as a pretext for war, be it,
mm,
post 9/11 and the war on terror, and terrorists are around every corner. The terrorist could be the person sitting next to you on an aeroplane. It was all about engendering fear. It was all about plugging people's minds that Muslim people are the problem. It's all Muslim people's fault. Every time you see a Muslim, and there were a lot of awful jokes and stuff that people used to tell, and they felt justified in telling those jokes, even though it wasn't all Muslims. And the irony is that I think for a lot of Jewish people, they're now being hit with the same stick, because it's not all Jews who support what Israel is doing, but all Jews are being painted with the same brush. And, given our conversation we had before Christmas about my concern that the way the Israelis are behaving is outside of legitimate rabbinical law. It's not taught in Judaism any more than it's not taught in Islam. Not every mosque, not every imam is trying to convince young Muslim men to strap on a suicide vest and go and blow something up. And likewise, not every rabbi is out there. In fact, most rabbis are saying this is not going to end well for Jewish people. When we've gone against our God, it's never ended well for us. And I think that is a lesson they're not heeding. We're coming up for a quick break. Do you want to add anything before we take a break?
Yeah, I mean, I just coming back to the fear part. I think fear is used, in the psychological warfare that we live in, and the ultimate aim of fear is to provide control or more control. And if you just look at what kind of like happened to us in the last 3-4 years with COVID and the fear mongering that went on with that, it's like, don't see your granny at Christmas time because you will. And I just think it's a weapon that is used repeatedly throughout history and will continue to be used, and until people stand up and go, no, we're not buying into this fear anymore. We're going to be sovereign and look into things on our own accord, and do more research on what is being told to us, and we will discern whether that is something that we want to believe in or not.
Yeah, and somehow that makes you a conspiracy theorist.
Yes, exactly.
And conspiracy theorists, so we need to be afraid of them also. Anyway, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll share some more thoughts on that. See you in a bit.
The world's largest radio station for the trans community. Trans Radio UK.
Welcome back, beautiful and amazing human beings. We were talking about the fear of conspiracy theories and how, if you try to break out of the matrix, you are painted as, a nutter, a tinfoil hat wearer. And I've got my tinfoil hat here somewhere.
I also have a tinfoil hat.
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily it's a bad thing. I think you've got to be circumspect. The thing which I find most interesting about it, though, as a trans person, is, and I've met a lot of other trans people who also, I think because we go through such an interesting journey becoming ourselves that we don't think inside the box, because we've lived all our lives outside of the box. We've lived outside the gender binary, so we do tend to be anti-establishment, or the biggest word in the English language, anti-disestablishmentarianism. That's that kind of where how I would describe myself. So I do follow a lot of the people who are painted as conspiracy theorists, like Joe Rogan back in the day, before he completely jumped the shark. Alex Jones, Luke Rudowski, I think his name is. And I never ever believed that a bunch of Saudi Arabians with box cutters caused 9/11. But the sad thing is, you follow these people and you agree with 99% of what they're saying. But almost to a man or woman, every single one of them is anti-trans. And I find that so frustrating because, and I know we don't, we on this show like to challenge the message, not the messenger. But even when you try and reach out to these people, like I spoke about last year, you try to reach out to them and say, hey, listen, your content is about anti-ULEZ or anti-EVs and that sort of thing. And I agree with you 100%. on all of those things. But why? But then you stepped into the trans thing. And now I want to challenge you because one, it has nothing to do with your content. And two, if you're going to have an opinion on something like you know about cars, you don't know about the intricacies of the gender spectrum. So if you're going to step off outside your lane and have a conversation about this thing, then inform yourself. And I think that's the problem with a lot of these people is they want to have their conspiracy theories and they want to say that they see the world in a completely different way to everyone else. And yet they can't see that actually they are falling into the same trap, that they are asleep. And, they love to say, oh, the sheeple. They are a sheeple when it comes to the gender question. And I just find that so ironic. And when you challenge them, when you reach out to them and you say, you know what, I like your content. We could have a conversation about cars and motorcycles and, all of those things. Or we could have a conversation about rugby and sports and all the rest of it. But let's also have a conversation about this gender thing because you brought it up. You brought it into your world. You brought it into the minds of the people who follow your channel for your automobile content. So come have a chat. So if you want to swim outside your lane, fine. You want to come swim in my lane, you're welcome to. But have a conversation with me before you start getting in my way, in my lane. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like I think there's a definite link there, and I think the narrative that these people are believing, these conspiracy theorists and fans of conspiracy theory, I think their narrative is that the people that control the world, the so-called controligarchs, as I like to call them, they wouldn't be able to do that and to manifest the new world order if you had strong toxic masculinity parading around, because men are, fighters, and they won't have any of that. So I think what they're looking at is that these control oligarchs are spreading this transgender idealism to replace strong men with, feminized women, so that they won't fight against the control. And that's definitely a mindset that I've picked up in all my research as to why. And then if you link that with they fundamentally, sort of like right wing Christianity kind of thing. And that appeals to them, or, we can't have transgender come in and pollute the male species and make them weak. And it's not natural because, God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve kind of mentality that it goes back to. So I think that's where it comes in. And again, that's linked to fear, fear of men being replaced. That fear is enough for them not to open their eyes and go, hang on a minute, I see what's happening here. This is not true, or this is disinformation. They're just blindly following into that fear that they're telling people not to be afraid of because, these control oligarchs who are taking over kind of thing. But they've been impacted themselves and they can't see it because they blinkered.
Control oligarchs. That's going to be our word for 2024.
Yes.
I like it.
Control oligarchs.
Control oligarchs. Yeah, because it's that coalescence of state, corporate, everything. That is. It's not politicians that are trying to control everything on their own. It's not corporations that are trying to control things on their own. It is like this. And I mean, that at the end of the day is the very definition of fascism, is the marriage of corporations and state. That's why fascists always nationalize industry, because you have to control all aspects of a person's existence if you're going to dominate them. So yeah, it's interesting that it's ironic, isn't it, that they have this idea that that somehow the woke agenda is all part of this nefarious plot to weaken men without realizing, I think most of them are weak anyway and ineffective and wouldn't stand a chance against. Yes, like if you take someone like Joe Rogan, I mean, he is like the Ubermensch. I mean, he is good-looking, intelligent, funny, fit as hell,
Yeah.
and he is like, you can't argue with his ultimate man status. And to be fair to him, he is respectful when he has people with alternative points of view on his shows. But I can guarantee you 99% of his followers are not Ubermensch. They're not fit. They're not intelligent. They're not funny. And so they are attracted to people like that because they think, because they are a fan of Joe Rogan, they are like Joe Rogan. They want to take it on themselves. And I think, like, for me, I remember must have been 2001 or 2 when I first started listening to Alex Jones. And I mean, his big thing at the time was that they're putting stuff in the water and it's turning the frogs gay. Do you remember that one? That conspiracy? And this was somehow proved, but actually, it was I don't want to go down that rabbit hole about how messed up our rivers are. Not yet. Maybe in this conversation, maybe for another one. But yeah, his whole thing was it's intentional. And that we can prove it because frogs are gay. And people were saying, well, frogs are what I can't quite think what the definition is, where they can change gender. I think they're one of those species that can do that, and so they do that anyway. Homosexuality is prevalent in rat communities. It's to say it's not natural is to ignore the evidence of where it happens everywhere across the fauna of this planet. So yeah, I think that whole thing around this grand conspiracy to feminize men, and again, it's consider the misogyny of that. What they're saying is it's trans women specifically that are the problem. It's not trans men. Trans men aspire to be Joe Rogan, so they're okay. It's trans women that are the problem. When you consider that we are 0.1% of the population, yes, maybe it's growing because people can come out. They're not forced underground like under Section 28. It's like if you start measuring earthquakes in a particular area that you've never measured earthquakes before, you're going to discover, a marked increase in the number of earthquakes in that area because you've never measured them there before. So,
Yeah, agreed.
And it goes back to the fear thing, doesn't it? It goes back to trying to engender fear in people. Make men afraid that they're going to be feminized.
Yeah, because the frogs are turning gay. That must mean that the chemicals, the hormones that they're putting in the water will turn men gay as well.
Well, that was the thrust of his argument.
Yeah.
It's this intentional plan to feminize men. So if that was in 2001 and it's now 22 years later, where's the epidemic of feminized men?
Well, they all turned into trans women.
Yeah, but this was supposed to be like wholesale, almost like race replacement theory, and they do link back to that whole replacement theory thing that trans women are going to replace women. So yeah, that's quite an
Maybe biologically it takes longer than 20 years.
Well, I mean, the problem for me is it completely messed up my perception of what was wrong with me because I thought, I wonder if that's true. But then also, I grew up, our house had a borehole, so we had our own water. If they were putting it in the water in Harare in 1974, 75, how are they putting it in my borehole water that I grew up with? Not quite sure. Doesn't make sense. So because it doesn't make sense, let's go to an ad break. And when we come back, we will talk some more. See you in a bit. Did you know we've got an absolutely wonderful merch store? You can buy merch from the show. You can buy this mug, which supports my rugby team, the Sussex Dragons. This is one of my favorites. This is best part of waking up, turf tears in my cup. We also have t-shirts, which support my rugby team. and t-shirts which express our dissatisfaction with England Rugby for the way they've treated trans people. And for you bikers out there, we've got our Sisters on Steel Motorcycle Club. Scan this or follow the links on tigergirl.substack.com. Now back to the show. Welcome back, beautiful and amazing human beings. One of the things that news pieces that came out before Christmas that I think we did talk about it was the court ruling around Brianna Jai's murder. I can't. Did we talk about that before Christmas? I can't quite remember.
We mentioned it, yeah, but I think it was still ongoing. The trial hadn't concluded yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, yeah, they hadn't been found guilty, but we did have a conversation about, was it computer games that were the reason, for the rise in mass shootings and things like that. And over the Christmas period, it was really amazing. And I want to give a shout out to Brianna Jai's family and their charity, which is called Peace in Mind. And they're doing some great work where they want to bring mindfulness courses into schools. Now, no doubt this will also be painted ultimately as some kind of trans agenda trying to backdoor trans conversion into our schools. But the reality is that mindfulness is something that's really important. And one of the things that Mrs. Jai was talking about was the fact that she had noticed that Brianna had become a lot more insular and spent a lot more time in her room. And, I still wonder to what extent her isolation was a factor in her decision to go out and meet those two kids, because maybe she wasn't, making friends and things like that. But the other thing that really struck me is the way the media have responded. I haven't quite got the words around this yet, but I felt like there was a dichotomy, and I'm kind of talking about this for the first time actually so pardon me if I go a little bit around trying to get my head around it. But it does seem to me that it bothered me, and it's been bothering me that the fact that she was trans, the media is saying and hammering on, that was not a factor in her being targeted by these two kids. So we can excuse ourselves as pill clutchers. That wasn't our fault, because it wasn't, there were other kids on the list. There were other kids who they were targeting. So, it's not that she was trans. That was the reason why she was targeted. And that's really bothered me. I think the best way I can express the dichotomy is that, so the fact that she was trans, we are supposed to believe that the fact that she was trans was not a factor in her being targeted, despite the boy X or whatever, child X, despite the fact that he had referred to her as an tranny. We're supposed to believe, yeah, but it was just because they were insane and antisocial children, psychotic children. So we're not allowed, as the trans community, to say this is a function of the hate speech, but because they're saying it's not a factor. But they won't give us that pass when someone like I can't even think of the person's name who raped women and was in prison in Scotland, and it caused the whole hoo-ha around trans women and women's prisons. And it's probably good that I don't remember her name, because we shouldn't give it air. But that was used to say, okay, but all trans people are like that.
Yes.
And that's really bothering me, is we can't have this. We can't say, listen, the fact that she was trans, yes, there were other kids, but why her specifically? And I think it is clear that the fact that she was trans bothered those two kids. It was a function of why they wanted to kill her. And yes, they had other people on their list that they wanted to kill, but it was definitely, had there not been this constant Daily Mail, Telegraph stuff about trans people being dangerous and a threat to society and an existential threat to Western civilization. Had it not been for that, they might not have been bothered by her and they might not have targeted her. And I just think we can own this. We can say, listen, the fact that she was trans was a function of their decision to kill her. And the media has a responsibility for having done that. And if they're not going to give us that, then they need to stop every time a trans person is discovered to have done something wrong, painting the whole trans community with the same brush. You can't have it both ways. I mean, what do you think?
No, I absolutely agree with you. You can't have it both ways. And I mean, we've mentioned earlier in the show about painting the Muslims or the Jews or the whoever's with the same brush, broadly saying transgender people are whatever. You can't do that. If you in the media, if you mainstream media, you have to have more balance in it. I think you've hit on something quite profound here, that it's almost like, oh, it wasn't because she was transgender that they killed her. And I think that's where that kind of message just perpetuates and carries on with the fear mongering that we've spoken about and things like that, because that narrative is going to get repeated and repeated and repeated, and like you say, as soon as a trans person does something, wins a race, a trans woman wins a race, then they show the bad side of it. It's just, yeah,
Yeah,
mind boggles, doesn't it?
Yeah, not the hundreds of trans people that aren't winning races.
Yeah.
This was this thing where I can't think of her name right now. The swimmer who's an
Yeah.
anti-trans.
Leah.
No. Oh, yes, that's the swimmer. I'm trying to think who
Yeah.
the ex-British swimmer was, who's anti-trans in sport and always like I can't think of her name. This is driving me mad. When I hand the mic over to you, I'll go and have a quick look. But anyway, her and Martina Navratilova have been in the news, pushing about how trans women in sport is a threat and all the rest of it. And it just, yeah, I mean, it doesn't. If it were if it were in the thousands, they're saying that the worst male performers are still better than the best female performers. And I mean, that is just so misogynistic. That is like, how can any self-respecting feminist be happy with that categorization, that characterization of it? It falls into the same bucket for me as those people who are all over YouTube bemoaning the fact that Marvel and Star Wars and everything has gone woke, and that they will say how character like Black Widow from the Marvel movies, it's impossible that she would be able to beat up men like that. And you're like, really? Have you, like, really? So yeah, I just think it's like, let it go, because it really doesn't. There isn't in reality, trans women are not overtaking women and never will, for reasons which research, which is due sometime in the new year, will demonstrate. And I will come back to that when it is published. But yeah, it really makes you think. And thoughts, Lee? I've sort of run out of something to say there.
I think just in closing, I think we must remember that our collective efforts must continue to break down these barriers of ignorance, because that's mainly what it is, and we need to challenge these roots of prejudice, by thinking independently, like we've mentioned on this before, because in doing so, we'll be able to dismantle the structures, the constructs, the narratives that perpetuate this inequality, and each little victory, a step towards the big victories of, equality and things like that. But it takes collective effort. It really does.
I'm still trying to find that that swimmer. Hold on, let me give me a second. Stay with me, guys. This is the problem with doing stuff live, is we have to fact check ourselves in real time. And I'm finding it actually hard to find this particular article, which I suppose is a good thing. So here she is, Sharon Davies. There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, so Sharon Davies. She's another one who I just think should stay in her lane. But and I'm more than willing to debate it with her. I do wonder if trans women aren't a category of their own in sport. I'm prepared to have that conversation, but
Yeah.
then we need to be given access to sport. And this kind of, I suppose, going full circle links back to what we were saying at the beginning, that trans women's fight for rights follows cis women's fight for rights. And yeah, I think we have to ensure that we expand the rights of everybody rather than actually like the terrible Tories would like to do, which is to take away all our human rights. So yeah, I think that's a good place to finish it. We actually managed to go a full circle. Oh, it's funny how good we are. We're getting good at this. Yeah, so final thoughts, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo your challenge there. It's, have a conversation with trans people, get to know them, and if you don't know any, then come on the show. We've got one right here that you can sit down and have a chat to. Yeah, just let's have some open debate. Come on the show.
Absolutely. And with that, thank you very much for listening. Do stick around after the break for MG's Unorthodox Jukebox. And we will see you next week. And it's a goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from Lee. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
For the community, by the community, Trans Radio UK.
All hit music.
This is Rihanna. Hey, this is Pink.
Trans Radio UK.